the idea of this session is to try and bring it all to life a little bit. We're talking about security, and we're obviously talking about identity-driven security. But how do you actually start to integrate that with the world of device management? So end-to-end device management, identity, bringing some of the building blocks of the security stack together. So it's not that long ago, we lived in a world where effectively you would be security was something that got in the way. It was something that made life harder in many ways. The security guys and the security technology was something that generally frustrated people. We're actually in a position where potentially we can start to use these security components to actually create genuinely exceptional end user experience. I'll talk a little bit about how we've just taken those components, brought them together. There's something we do that's device lifecycle services that we do, and identity together. And a quick summary in Q&A. So, end user frustration is something that we see quite a lot, and we're in particular, if we look at onboarding. So generally, the first experience that a user has when they join an organisation is obviously the first experience of IT will be them getting their kit. It's the first experience that people will have. Quite often these days, they've got multiple devices that are being provided to them. So there may well be a corporate device, you've then got a corporate laptop device, you've then potentially got a smartphone being handed over as well. They've got to be set up for their various logins, they've got to have permissions to all the various systems in place, and ultimately, one of the really interesting questions is, how productive are people when they first join an organisation? Because in a lot of organisations, if you're honest, or if we're honest, it's often not a great experience. It's not unheard of for an organisation to potentially be taking in the order of days to get everything in place so that effectively IT starts to dissolve into the background, if you like, and people can just start getting on with their job. Now, that is not a great first impression, and actually, ironically, security can be a way to sort this sort of stuff out. And so this is where we start to think about how can we start to bring this to life a little bit. So we're known as the identity guys. We're able to help you really bring together the Microsoft Entra stack, power that, integrate it in with devices though. So now you've got the concept of Intune in the background, and in particular, Intune Suite going forwards, and the ability to actually create a standard way of deploying and configuring devices across all endpoints. So this is kind of a workflow that we go through. Sorry, the text is a little bit small here, but we've basically got the black line, which is a user action, and then blue line is a system action. So the key thing here is we start with a master source of truth. So in this case, and it's very often the case, it's the HR system. So the HR system is the master source of truth of who works for an organisation. Now, basically, at some point when someone joins an organisation, the data gets input into the HR system. So this person is going to start on this date, etc., etc. Now that can trigger a whole suite of things that start to kick in. So we can actually start to create a user in Entra ID automatically. This is where Entra ID governance is kicking in, pulling the data out of Bamboo HR in this case, or other HR platforms, and starting to create that user automatically and permission it and set the status of it in Entra. Now that is something that will also start to set up potentially, if you've still got your world of on-prem, it will also start to write back to Active Directory. So it will say this user, groups, password, etc. And all of that gets synchronized around. So we've now got potentially legacy applications that are still there, still being used, that people need access to. That's all set up as well. What we can also do is clearly provision directly into Entra ID and set up permissions to all kinds of things. You know, the broad array of services that you now have set up for access under Entra ID. And crucially, even go so far as to start creating the user in Office 365 and therefore provisioning their mailbox. And we can then start to actually feed information back as well. So now the system has created the email account. We now have an email address, and that can be fed back into Bamboo HR, which is a really important field, because when the person in HR is setting up the system, they don't know how many Andy Browns there are in the organisation. There's normally more than one, as I tend to find. Common name. We can then start to trigger some really interesting stuff. So because this is all within a platform, it's now possible to start to trigger some really interesting device workflows. So this is where we really do bring together the stacks. So you can actually send a request either to, let's say, the line manager of the person who's joining the organisation to say, this person's joining, which device do you want them to have? Or can you confirm that it's this device? Or potentially, you could even go to the end user themselves and say, which device would you like? And then we can kick in with a whole piece powered by the Intune stack. And this is, again, where the Intune suite really comes to life, is we can start to actually create orders for devices, and then we can start to set everything up from that side as well. We can also go to the end user, even before they've joined the organisation, potentially, if we choose to do so, to say, you're going to join Cocho, let's set you up. And then we can do all of the various pieces that then kick in on an ongoing basis to make sure that it's kept compliant on an ongoing basis. Now that flow is bringing together components from the Microsoft stack today. And effectively, it creates this wonderful world where we've got effectively all of the various pieces that we also do on the hardware side available as well. So we can start to work with you to have, you can have a catalogue of devices. You can say, right, these devices are available. We can do all of that request validation, either automated. So if you trust that once someone goes into the HR system, they automatically get a device, just get it to go ahead, all the way through to having full improvement management and workflows that kick off. We can do all of the fulfillment, resolution, stock management, but also, crucially, what happens at the end of life of the device as well. This is a complete lifecycle service. So whether it's this first join, or possibly someone's left, so we get the device back automatically, we can reuse the device, put it back into stock, refresh it, and then that goes out to another user, all the way through to the end of life. You can potentially start to trade these devices back in. They can be securely recycled. You can actually realise some of the residual value in them, but crucially, you can also tick the security box to say you actually dealt with it, not stuck it in a cupboard. And this is for all devices. So just to be really clear, obviously this is about the Windows devices, but it's also about all devices, whether mobile operating systems, iOS, Android, but it's also macOS going forwards as well. The interesting statistic that came out of the trip to Redmond, and this is a big focus area for Microsoft, is actually managing Mac under the same umbrella of Intune. And one of the key statistics they mentioned was the fact that outside of the mobile ecosystems, if you look at effectively laptops/desktops, although let's be honest, they're all laptops now, 20% of the market effectively is now Mac. And that is clearly, an opportunity for Microsoft to grow, but it's also an important point that it's a blind spot if you're trying to do a consistent security policy, but also it's an important point that if users are comfortable working on Mac and like Mac and use Mac in their private lives, potentially you've got the option to actually start to give them the technology they want going forwards as well. One of the big barriers to Mac adoption traditionally has been the fact that all the apps are running on a different platform. But increasingly, as we shift to cloud first, Mac becomes less of, or the different OS becomes less of a barrier. So we're seeing a real adoption of Mac. And the management of Mac across Intune is a big area. And clearly, when it comes to the hardware manufacturers, we can help you with whatever it is. So all of the major hardware providers are supported under this. We can do all of this. So then we can start to try and bring it to life in terms of what's the end user experience for staff. So here's an example of a form. So this is automatically being created. So this is the example of a form that would go to a manager to say, this person's joining. What devices do you want them to have? Now, it may be that there is no choice. But we quite often do see that most organisations will have a level of profiling going on. Now, we could map that to something that's in the HR database. So again, it's not a choice, but it's also the option that some business units may choose to actually set a higher higher spec device than others. Finance, say, being a case in point. They would have a higher spec unit because of the Excel capabilities they need to have, or marketing. They're the Mac exception. So you can actually bring marketing into the journey as well. Or potentially, before people even have joined, you can potentially ask the end user themselves. You can say, you're going to be joining us. Which device would you like? Imagine that. You joined an organisation and someone actually asked you what you wanted. Again, all of this is configurable in the system. It's entirely up to you. But you can also then start to do some really interesting stuff, because if you're going straight to the end user, you can start to say, you're going to be joining us. Here's some really interesting information. This is when you're going to start. We can say all kinds of things. This is all completely configurable. Again, before someone's even walked in the building, you've potentially created a great impression. You can start to go, depends how far ahead you're recruiting, but quite often people joining an organisation come with quite a long lead time. The truth is, if they're working a notice period elsewhere, it's probably a month or more. You've got the opportunity to even send refreshers. You can start to say, what to expect on your first day, or we're excited to have you join just before you arrive. And then when they actually arrive in the office, then you can do some really cool stuff. You can actually start to say, right, we'll brand the box that arrives. You can say, this is your branded experience as you arrive. It's actually got your laptop, it's got your smartphone, it might even have some printed instructions on the inside of the lid. It's infinitely configurable in this way. Always an interesting security conversation about whether branding it is right or wrong. My view is, end of the day, it's a cardboard box. Until it's been set up, it's not actually a threat to your environment. And this is one of the interesting things, is the end user experience is ultimately, they've received a bit of kit. At that point, it's still effectively factory fresh. It's not been set up yet. Because that's the point, is you've picked your device, you've got automated communications going to the end user, and the right things arrive on time. The user themselves, without you getting involved, has set up their password. So that concept of the IT admin setting everybody a generic password, used to be London 1 in a major global bank, I won't say which one. Everyone, when they joined the bank, had London 1. And then they had to change their password. Now, clearly, that's not the case anymore. It's London 2, in case anyone's wondering. But no, in all seriousness, this is an ability for users to effectively be doing some of the onboarding work before they've even arrived in the office. And then when they get their kit, whether it's at their home office or whether it's at your office where everyone comes into, they can set up their device. And this is where the power of Intune, Windows 11 and Autopilot really does start to come to life. This is quite transformational stuff for an end user. People are very used in their personal lives to buying a piece of tech, logging into it, and it's setting itself up. That's pretty normal experience in your personal lives. Your smartphones have done it forever. But for a work device, this is pretty revolutionary stuff. And this really is quite a wow moment. Now, some people may say, well, it takes 30 minutes. 30 minutes. What are they going to do? Well, the answer is they're going to probably be in a meeting with their line manager that they've never met before, or whatever it is. The point is this machine is now building in the background. And this is the power of the Intune piece coming together. And all of the security and management capabilities are now built into the Intune suite as well. So I really would emphasize looking at Intune Suite going forwards, the ability for you to standardize and simplify all of the various agents and tech and bits and pieces that you tend to have running on an endpoint. We see a lot of this. You've obviously got the security of that endpoint, and then you've got various agents that want to monitor that endpoint. It's like, we need to gather data from that endpoint, and we need to patch that endpoint. We need to apply security updates and do all the patching and updates to the applications. We need to have an agent to actually understand what the user experience is, because the user experience is terrible because we've got all these bloody agents on the endpoint. That is the truth of what we've seen out there. It's like, why are my laptops starting up so slowly? The answer is because they're loading loads of software agents in the background when you log in. You can actually have a lot of this stuff just straight out of the box. And I really would recommend looking at the application management capabilities that now come in Intune Suite. So this idea that we see a replication of effort across many organizations just patching updates. So Adobe releases a new version of Adobe Reader, everybody has to package it up and push it out to all of the endpoints. Why would you keep repeating that? It's just there and available, and you can just have it automatically go out, because it's a security risk. You've got to keep on top of that stuff. But that end user experience is effectively then amazing. They're now at their desktop and up and running. They've got the standard suite of applications. They've got the right applications for their role, and they're now able to get up and running. So, quick summary there. Clearly, we can automate all of that. That is genuinely, I think, quite transformational for end user experience. It gives you better control and visibility. And ultimately, we can start to help drive a better cost management of the estate as well, because if you actually have device lifecycle services that are looking at devices going out the door and bringing them back in, then you're actually keeping costs better under control. A lot of devices end up in cupboards and God knows what over time.